In 1999, researchers at Duke University ran an experiment that quietly overturned a lot of assumptions. They took a group of older adults with major depression and split them into three groups. One took an antidepressant, one did nothing but aerobic exercise 3 times a week, one did both. By the 4-month mark, all three groups had improved, roughly the same amount. The pill wasn't beating the treadmill. But the real twist came later. When researchers checked back in about 10 months afterward, the people who had exercised without medication were significantly less likely to have relapsed back into depression than the people who had relied on the pill alone. This video isn't telling you to throw away medication. For many people, medication is necessary and effective, and that's a decision for you and a doctor, not a YouTube video. What it is telling you is this: the thing you've been putting off, the walk, the 15 minutes on the mat, the 2 flights of stairs, is not a minor lifestyle tweak. It's one of the most well-studied interventions in psychology. So let's actually look at what it does. We'll go through what's happening in your brain chemically, then 5 specific psychological benefits backed by research: anxiety, depression, memory, confidence, and sleep, followed by 2 things that genuinely surprised researchers: how little exercise is actually needed and whether the type you choose matters, starting with your brain. Here's the short version of the biology, and I'll keep it simple. When you move your body, especially anything that raises your heart rate, your brain releases a cocktail of chemicals. Endorphins are the famous one, but they're not actually the main story. The more interesting player is a group of molecules called endocannabinoids, yes, related to the same receptor system that cannabis acts on. Researchers now believe these, not endorphins, are largely responsible for what people call runner's high, that loose, calm, slightly euphoric feeling after a sustained effort. But the change that matters most for your long-term mental health isn't a chemical high. It's a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of BDNF as fertilizer for your brain cells. It helps neurons survive, grow new connections, and in a few brain regions, it supports the creation of entirely new neurons. Exercise is one of the most reliable ways known to raise BDNF levels, and where BDNF rises most consistently is a small seahorse-shaped structure buried deep in your brain called the hippocampus, the region most responsible for memory and mood regulation. There's also a dopamine component worth mentioning, the same reward-signaling chemical involved in motivation and anticipation, not just pleasure. This is part of why a workout you were dreading can leave you feeling oddly motivated afterward, not just relieved it's over. So exercise isn't just changing how you feel for an hour, it's changing the physical structure available to feel with. Let's go through what that actually buys you, one piece at a time. Let's start with the one most people notice first: anxiety. Your body's stress response runs largely on a hormone called cortisol. In short bursts, cortisol is useful. It's what gets you out of the way of a car. The problem is chronic, low-grade cortisol that never fully switches off, which is what a lot of modern anxiety actually feels like. Here's the counterintuitive part. Exercise itself is a physical stressor. Your heart rate spikes, your cortisol rises briefly during the session. But regular exercise trains your stress response system the same way it trains a muscle. It becomes more efficient at turning the response on when needed, and more importantly, at turning it back off afterward. Studies reviewing this effect describe it as exercise blunting your cortisol reactivity over time, meaning the same stressful email or traffic jam produces a smaller, shorter spike in someone who exercises regularly than in someone who doesn't. You're not eliminating stress, you're upgrading the brakes. And this doesn't require months to show up. A well-known meta-analysis pooling dozens of trials found that a single session of moderate aerobic exercise, as short as 20 minutes, reliably reduces state anxiety immediately afterward, an effect that shows up within hours and is one of the most consistent findings in exercise psychology. In other words, the walk you take specifically because you're anxious right now is not a distraction technique, it's a documented, immediate intervention. Let's go back to that Duke study from the intro, because it's part of a much larger body of research. Exercise appears to work on depression through at least 3 separate channels at once, which is part of why the effect is so consistent across studies. Biologically, that BDNF increase we talked about specifically supports the hippocampus, and depression is associated with a smaller, less active hippocampus. Exercise also increases serotonin and dopamine availability, the same neurotransmitter systems most antidepressant medications target directly. Behaviorally, depression often creates a withdrawal loop. You feel low, so you do less. And doing less removes the small wins and social contact that could improve your mood, which makes you feel lower. Exercise, even in tiny amounts, interrupts that loop by forcing one small action. And a large 2018 study published in The Lancet Psychiatry, looking at over 1 million people, found that people who exercised reported significantly fewer poor mental health days per month than people who didn't, across nearly every type of exercise studied. The size of the workout mattered less than most people assume. We'll come back to exactly how little is needed later. It's genuinely surprising. That same Lancet Psychiatry study found something specific about dose 2. The sweet spot was around 45 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week. Interestingly, people exercising more than 3 hours a day actually reported worse mental health than people who didn't exercise at all. A reminder that this is a real intervention with a real dose curve, not an infinite is infinite better situation. For now, the point is this: if depression is partly a hippocampus problem and partly a behavioral trap, exercise is one of the few interventions that hits both at once. Here's a specific number worth remembering. In a well-known study published in PNAS, researchers had older adults do aerobic exercise, brisk walking, for a year. The control group, who did light stretching instead, showed the hippocampus shrinking slightly, which is the normal pattern of aging. The walking group's hippocampus grew by about 2%. That might sound small, but researchers described it as effectively reversing 1 to 2 years of age-related volume loss from walking. Not medication, not a supplement, walking. And the hippocampus isn't just about remembering where you put your keys, it's central to forming new long-term memories and, as we covered, to regulating mood. A structure that shrinks with age and with depression is a structure that grows with aerobic movement. It's not just memory storage either. A separate, widely cited meta-analysis found that of all the cognitive skills studied, the one that improved most with aerobic fitness training was executive function, planning, focus, and resisting distraction. In an attention-fractured world, that's not a small bonus. This is also why exercise shows up so often in research on preventing cognitive decline. It's not a guarantee against anything, but structurally, it is one of the few things we know reliably pushes in the opposite direction of brain aging, instead of just slowing it down. Everything so far has been biological. This one isn't, and it might be just as powerful. Psychologist Albert Bandura spent decades studying something he called self-efficacy, your internal belief that you're capable of doing hard things and following through on them. Bandura found that the single strongest way to build self-efficacy isn't a pep talk or a mindset shift. It's what he called a mastery experience, actually doing a difficult thing and watching yourself succeed. Exercise is an unusually efficient mastery experience machine. It's hard in a small, repeatable, measurable way. You said you'd do 20 push-ups, and you did them. You said you'd run for 15 minutes, and you ran for 15 minutes. And here's the part that matters. Self-efficacy doesn't stay in the gym. Research on this consistently finds that it transfers. People who build confidence through physical training report more confidence in unrelated areas too, like work challenges or difficult conversations. You're not just building a body that can do more, you're collecting evidence, workout by workout, for a very specific argument, that when you say you're going to do something difficult, you actually do it. Researchers who study this call it a mastery experience feedback loop. Each completed session slightly raises your confidence, and higher confidence makes you slightly more likely to show up for the next one. It compounds in both directions, which is exactly why the first 2 weeks are the hardest part, and also why they matter the most. Before we move on, one honest question: does the type of exercise actually matter, or is any movement equally good? That same large Lancet Psychiatry study broke this down by activity type, and the differences were interesting. Team sports, cycling, and combined aerobic and gym workouts were associated with the largest reductions in poor mental health days, noticeably larger than solo activities like running alone. The likely reason isn't the exercise itself, it's what tends to come bundled with it: social contact, a scheduled commitment you can't easily blow off, and often being outdoors. Speaking of outdoors, there's a separate body of research on what's sometimes called green exercise, physical activity done in natural settings. A meta-analysis pooling multiple studies found that exercising outdoors, even briefly, produces a measurable extra boost to mood and self-esteem compared to the exact same workout done indoors, with the biggest jump happening in the first 5 minutes and the largest effect near water. None of this means solo, indoor workouts don't count, they clearly do, as every study in this video shows. It just means that if you're choosing between 2 options you're equally willing to do, the version with other people and some daylight isn't just more pleasant, it appears to be doing measurably more. A large meta-analysis pooling dozens of studies found that regular physical activity is reliably linked to falling asleep faster, sleeping more deeply, and waking up less during the night. The mechanism is partly the same cortisol regulation we already talked about, and partly a simple one. Exercise raises your core body temperature, and the drop in temperature a few hours later helps trigger the biological signal for sleep onset. One quick myth to clear up. For years, people were told never to exercise close to bedtime because it's too stimulating. Newer reviews of the evidence have found this is true for some people, but far from universal. For a lot of people, even a vigorous evening workout doesn't meaningfully hurt sleep as long as there's some wind-down time afterward. The honest individual answer is, test it on yourself. What consistently helps almost everyone, regardless of timing, is simply doing it regularly. And this one matters more than it sounds, because sleep isn't separate from everything we've covered. It's the foundation underneath the cortisol regulation, the BDNF production, and the mood benefits all happening properly in the first place. Now the part I promised earlier, because if everything up to this point sounds great but exhausting, this is where it gets genuinely surprising. The official guideline from the World Health Organization is about 150 minutes of moderate activity per week, roughly 20 minutes a day. That's a reasonable, well-supported target, and if you can hit it, you should. But a 2022 study published in Nature Medicine, tracking wearable data from tens of thousands of adults who did not exercise in any formal sense, found something remarkable. People who simply moved vigorously in very short bursts throughout the day, a minute of brisk stair climbing, a fast uphill dog walk, sprinting for a bus, several times daily, saw a dramatic reduction in cardiovascular risk and mortality compared to people who stayed sedentary. Researchers started calling this exercise snacking. No gym membership, no workout clothes, no hour carved out of your day. This doesn't mean short bursts fully replace everything we've discussed. The hippocampus study used sustained walking, not stair sprints. But it does mean the all-or-nothing thinking that keeps a lot of people from starting. I don't have an hour, so what's the point? Is not supported by the evidence. The actual finding, across nearly every study in this video, is closer to something is dramatically better than nothing, and more is only somewhat better than something. Which means the 2 flights of stairs you take instead of the elevator today are not a consolation prize. They're already doing measurable work. So here's how to actually use any of this. First, attach it to something you already do every day without fail. This is sometimes called habit stacking. Not I will exercise in the morning, but after I pour my coffee, I will do 10 squats before I drink it. The existing habit becomes the trigger, so you don't have to rely on motivation or memory. Second, make the starting version embarrassingly small. Behavior researcher B.J. Fogg calls this tiny habits. The goal isn't a good workout. The goal is starting. 2 push-ups, putting on your shoes, and walking to the end of the driveway. This feels almost too easy, and that's the entire point. You are far more likely to do 2 push-ups and then keep going than you are to talk yourself into an hour-long session that never begins. Consistency, repeated for weeks, is what actually builds the brain changes we've discussed. A single heroic workout does almost none of it. Third, and maybe most important, let your identity update. Every time you complete the tiny version, you're not just moving your body, you're collecting one more piece of evidence for a specific sentence. I'm someone who does this. Eventually, the sentence stops being something you're trying to convince yourself of and starts being something you just are. One last practical note, because I know the objections that come up. What if it's raining? The 2 push-ups still count, indoors, no equipment needed. What if I feel awkward at a gym? Nothing in this video requires a gym. A hallway, a park bench, and a flight of stairs cover almost everything we've discussed. What if I miss a day? You're not aiming for a perfect streak, you're aiming for a pattern. And one missed day doesn't erase the last 20. Everything in this video, the hormones, the hippocampus, the sleep, the confidence, starts with the same absurdly small action, not a transformation, just the next 2 minutes. Thanks for watching all the way through. That's genuinely rare these days. If this was useful, subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.